police officer struck Ronda Rousey with a baton, only to realize, just a second later, that he had picked the wrong person to mess with. Before we dive into what happened next, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments below. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden light across the park, filtering through thick branches of oak and maple. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, mingling with the soft echoes of children laughing in the distance and birds chirping overhead. A gentle breeze whispered through the trees, offering small moments of relief from the summer heat. Joggers passed by with steady strides, families laid out on blankets sharing sandwiches and stories, and a group of teenagers tossed a ball near the playground, their voices rising above the low hum of nature. Dogs barked with joy as they chased after frisbees, and cyclists rang their bells as they weaved through the winding paths. Under a large, weathered oak stood an old wooden bench, its paint faded by years of sun and rain. Sitting there, quiet and almost unnoticed, was a woman. She didn't stand out at first glance, but something about her presence made people pause, like she belonged to the park itself. Calm. Rooted. Still. One arm was draped casually over the bench, the other slowly broke off pieces of a protein bar, dropping them at her feet where a small group of pigeons eagerly pecked at the crumbs. She watched them in silence, lips set in a line, neither smiling nor frowning. That woman was Ronda Rousey. Even in her stillness, there was a quiet intensity about her. The kind of energy that doesn't need to shout. That's been forged in years of combat, discipline, and pain. She wore black athletic leggings and a simple gray hoodie, her blonde hair pulled back tight. Her face, sharp cheekbones, focused eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had never flinched, radiated calm. But not the soft kind. The kind that's earned through surviving storms without moving. She wasn't there as a fighter. She wasn't there for attention. She was just a woman taking a moment to breathe. No crowds. No lights. No opponents. Just her, the bench, and a rare sense of peace. Until that peace was broken. Heavy, purposeful footsteps cut through the natural rhythm of the park. The sound didn't belong. It was sharp. Commanding. Like a warning shot wrapped in the echo of polished boots on pavement. Even before he appeared, people felt him coming. Officer Brent Carlisle. Towering. Impeccably dressed in LAPD blue. Mirrored sunglasses, utility belt loaded with tools of control, baton, handcuffs, taser, sidearm. Every step he took announced that this was a man who expected to be noticed and obeyed. Carlisle didn't patrol, he prowled. He didn't see a park, he saw territory. He wasn't looking to protect, he was looking to control. Known around the area as someone who didn't ask twice, who didn't wait for explanations. He didn't believe in kindness. He believed in dominance. And when people didn't fall in line, they paid for it. As his eyes scanned the park, he quickly sorted everyone into mental categories: safe, harmless, compliant. But then, he saw her. Sitting alone. Doing nothing wrong, but something about her stillness irritated him. She wasn't jogging. She wasn't playing. She wasn't walking a dog. She was just sitting. And that, to him, looked suspicious. He'd seen people like her before. Calm. Confident. Untouched by fear. The kind that didn't flinch under pressure. And he hated that. He hated when someone acted like rules weren't meant for them. He saw it as his job to remind them. So, he changed direction. Boots pounding the pavement with calculated intent. And that's when things went from quiet to unforgettable. His presence hit before his voice ever had to. As he closed the distance, his fingers brushed the baton at his side, an instinctive touch, not out of fear, but familiarity. He didn't expect resistance, but he always welcomed an excuse to remind people who was in charge. Around them, the park carried on, dogs tugged at leashes. A woman slowed her walk just enough to glance between the officer and the woman on the bench, her instincts picking up what her ears hadn't yet heard. A group of teens tossing a ball paused, exchanging silent looks. They'd seen this officer before. They knew the signs. Something was coming. Carlisle stopped. His shadow stretched across Ronda like a warning. Feet wide. Hands resting on his belt. His posture didn't ask for respect, it demanded it. The pigeons scattered at his feet, flapping wildly as if they too felt the tension cutting through the air. But Ronda didn't move. She didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Didn't even look up. She remained exactly as she was, calm, grounded, unreadable. Half her face now in the shadow of his frame, the other still lit by the sun slipping lower through the trees. Carlisle didn't like it. He was used to reactions, subtle shifts, nervous chatter, the instant submission that came when people realized they were in the presence of power. But she gave him nothing. Not a nod. Not a glance. Not an ounce of the fear or compliance he fed off. The air between them thickened. The park around them seemed to quiet. Even the birdsong dimmed, like nature itself had stepped back to observe. Carlisle drew in a slow breath, chest rising, nostrils flaring, his patience cracking at the edges. This was the part where people usually bent. But she didn't. She sat still, unbothered, as if he were just another tree casting shade. That silence wouldn't last. He shifted, the faint scrape of his boot grinding against the pavement. His fingers flexed near the baton again, habit, maybe, or preparation. He never started trouble without a reason, but he never hesitated once it arrived. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched longer. Golden light faded into something colder. But in that small circle, just one man standing, one woman sitting, there was no warmth. Only pressure. Those nearby felt it. They didn't need words. It was that crackle in the air, that moment before the lightning, the kind of stillness that never ends well. The breeze moved, but Ronda didn't. And then, the silence shattered. His voice cut through the air like a blade, cold, clipped, and rehearsed. The kind of voice meant to stop conversations and summon obedience. But from her? Nothing. No reaction. No explanation. No fear. His jaw tightened. She wasn't ignoring him. She was dismissing him. And that, he couldn't allow. Carlisle didn't just wear a badge. He was the badge. To him, authority wasn't protection, it was control. And control was earned in these moments. When defiance stood still, and force was ready to move. He felt it, that creeping warmth of adrenaline rising under his skin, not like fire, but a slow, simmering burn. His fingers, almost without thought, brushed the baton at his side. The cool, textured grip grounded him. It was familiar. Reliable. A symbol of control. His voice came low and edged like a warning shot. But she still didn't respond. That silence? It cut deeper than any insult. His irritation chilled into something sharper, something that scraped like metal against bone. This wasn't defiance. This was indifference. And in his world, indifference was the same as a challenge. So he moved. Fast. Without another word. The baton arced downward in a clean, controlled strike, aimed not to injure, but to correct. To punish. To remind. The polished shaft sliced through the air like a whisper with teeth. But it hit nothing. At the last second, she shifted, not in panic, not with speed, but with the kind of quiet grace only born from living in the company of violence. The strike missed by an inch, slamming into the bench instead, the wood cracking sharply under the blow. Carlisle blinked. Confusion. Then frustration. His first strike, fast and precise, had missed. But instinct and pride pushed him forward. He twisted, wrist snapping into a backhanded follow-up, this time lower, toward her ribs. It never landed. Her hand came up, smooth, calm, inevitable, and caught the baton mid-swing. Not with strain. Not with effort. She just took it. Her grip was firm, steady. Like catching a falling branch. The strike didn't bounce back, it stopped. Completely. For a heartbeat, everything froze. His muscles screamed at him. Her fingers, wrapped around the baton, were too still. Too calm. There was no struggle, just power. Quiet, terrifying power. A current passed between them, silent and primal. You made a mistake. His instincts shouted, step back. Regroup. Reassess. But pride doesn't listen. He yanked hard, trying to rip the baton free. It didn't move. Instead, she did. Her arm twisted. Not violently, but with mechanical precision. His wrist turned unnaturally. Tendons protested. And then, release. The baton slipped from his hand. Not torn. Not wrestled. Just taken. It hit the pavement with a sharp clatter, rolling once before settling in the silence. The kind of silence that breathes. Around them, the world had slowed. A small cluster of onlookers, young men, a couple, a woman with her dog, stood still. Eyes wide. Phones raised. The glowing screens captured the moment. The impossible moment. Carlyle's breath grew tight. His chest rose and fell in sharp rhythm. His wrist tingled. But it wasn't the pain that gripped him, it was what it meant. He had escalated. He had struck first. He had failed. And she hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. Hadn't retaliated. She just let the baton fall from her hand, like it wasn't worth the weight. His ears burned. That cold rush of shame slithered under his skin like venom. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He squared up. His muscles tense. His pride, shattered and screaming, begged for control. The crowd waited. His authority now hung by a thread. He still had options. His hand twitched toward another answer, the weight of his service weapon pressing against his side like a dark invitation. And for the first time since this began, doubt crept in. She hadn't run. Hadn't fought. Hadn't flinched. But the air felt electric. A moment suspended, one of those rare moments that divides time. Before. And after. The ground under him no longer felt solid. The path ahead blurred by the fog of anger, shame, and adrenaline. Children laughed in the distance, unaware that a line had already been crossed. No words were spoken. But her silence? It roared. The storm hadn't just arrived. It was already here. And the soft symphony of the summer day, the laughter, the footsteps, the birdsong, had been swallowed by something colder, heavier. All the light had drained into the space between them. The baton still echoed in his ears. But it was the silence that followed. That struck the deepest. His breath came short and clipped, chest rising in uneven bursts. His wrist throbbed, nerves still humming from the impossible grip that had disarmed him. But it wasn't pain that burned through him now. It was humiliation. The phones. The eyes. The weight of judgment pressed against his skin like fire. She hadn't even stood up. His authority, the very thing he wore like armor, had been peeled away in front of witnesses. Not by force. Not by some overwhelming strength. But by a silence that couldn't be taught. Only earned. Around him, the murmurs of the crowd began to rise, distant but sharp. He couldn't hear every word, but he could feel them. And worse, he saw the phones, too many phones, raised, recording, immortalizing the moment he lost control. And beneath the sting of wounded pride, something darker twisted in his gut. Cold. Sharp. Unforgiving. This couldn't be how it ended. Without thought, only instinct, his hand dropped to his belt. Years of training guiding muscle memory, not judgment. His thumb snapped the strap on his holster. The grip of the firearm pressed into his palm like a lifeline. Control. Power. But he never got the chance to draw. Her hand was already there. She moved like wind over water, fluid, effortless, inevitable. Before he could lift the weapon, her hand wrapped around his wrist. No struggle. No force. Just certainty. His muscles tensed, but his grip faltered. The gun slipped from his grasp. She didn't wrench it away. She didn't yank. She just took it. 1 second it was his. The next, it wasn't. And then it was gone. The firearm, heavy with meaning, now rested in her palm like it belonged there. She didn't raise it. Didn't point it. She just looked at it. Examined it. Like someone flipping over a rock they had no intention of keeping. Around them, the world held its breath. The murmurs died out. What replaced them was worse, nothing. A stillness so fragile, it felt like glass ready to shatter. The balance of power had tipped. Then it had broken. Carlyle felt the absence of the weapon like a hole in his chest. He stood rigid, heart hammering against ribs, his mind screaming for action. For something to reclaim what he'd just lost. But she still didn't move. She didn't gloat. Didn't smirk. Didn't threaten. Instead, she bent her knees, lowered herself, and gently placed the weapon beside the fallen baton. The gun met the pavement with a quiet clink, small, unimpressive. The kind of sound that shouldn't matter. But it did. Because she made it meaningless. Then, just like that, she sat back down. Calm. Composed. Like the entire confrontation had been nothing more than a mild interruption. And he was still standing. Still frozen. Still irrelevant. The crowd's silence cracked. A wave of whispers. Gasps. A few chuckles. Phones catching every angle. Every failure. Carlyle's jaw clenched. His fists followed. This wasn't defiance. This was dismissal. And that he couldn't take. Pride scorched through his veins, hotter than any warning his instincts tried to send. He moved without thinking, just rage. A surge forward, wild, raw, desperate to reclaim what had been stripped from him in silence. But desperation doesn't have precision. She did. She didn't strike. Didn't hit. She just shifted. A slight movement. A redirection. And his momentum met something solid, unseen, like slamming into a wall wrapped in velvet. His wrist, again, was gone. Control, gone. His footing, gone. And for a heartbeat, he was weightless. The sky, brilliant and blue, spun into view. Then, impact. The ground caught him. Back flat against the pavement. A thud that echoed louder in his ego than in his spine. The air burst from his lungs. His vision blurred. He wasn't injured. He was finished. Around him, the mood shifted. No longer surprise. Not even awe. It was recognition. They hadn't seen a fight. They had seen a lesson. Carlyle's chest rose and fell, each breath labored. Not from pain, but from the crushing realization that it was over. The tools on his belt meant nothing. The badge on his chest? Weightless. And above him, still seated, still silent, was the woman who had ended it all without violence, without effort. There was no gloating in her eyes. No smirk. No triumph. Just calm. Just that quiet, terrifying patience of someone who had seen this 100 times before and chose not to escalate. And in that gaze, Carlyle felt something colder than humiliation. She had held back. His fists clenched. But even his own body whispered what his pride refused to admit. It was done. His fists pressed into the pavement, nails digging deep into his palms as the inferno of failure swallowed him whole. His breath came fast, ragged. His chest felt like it might cave in, not from impact, but from the weight of shame, the eyes, the judgment, the silence. That silence was the worst part. She hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. The world had already heard her loud and clear. But Carlisle wasn't ready to be ended like that. Not by silence. Not by her. Not in front of them. His pride, bloody, burning, raw, demanded a response. A conclusion. Something to say he was still in control. His hand, trembling but driven by years of training and the stubborn instinct to dominate, reached down. Not for the gun. Not for the baton. For the radio. His fingers closed around the cold curve of the device. A lifeline. A lever. He pressed the button. Officer needs assistance. Immediate backup. His voice was tight, hoarse, but it cut through the heavy stillness like a blade. The energy shifted. The crowd, once hushed in awe, now flicked glances between one another. Phones still up. Mouths half open. Unsure if they were watching the end or the start of something far worse. And for the first time, her expression changed. Not panic. Not worry. Something colder. Calculated. As if to say, you've made your move. Now I make mine. In the distance, the sound of sirens broke through the summer air like a war drum. Rising. Drawing closer. The park, once full of warmth and laughter, now felt tense, brittle, on the edge. No one spoke. But everyone knew this was no longer just a confrontation. It had become a scene. Carlisle felt the pavement against his back, hot from the sun, rough against his skin. His lungs dragged air that felt too thick. His radio still clenched in his hand. His entire body was on fire, not from injury, but from exposure. The sirens were getting closer. Backup meant more eyes. More judgment. But it also meant a chance to twist the narrative. To rise not as the officer who'd been disarmed, dropped, dismissed, but as the one who subdued a threat. Even if that threat had never lifted a finger. She was still seated. Still composed. Still infuriatingly still. No aggression. No apology. Just existing, confidently, quietly, outside the reach of his control. That made it worse. So much worse. He pushed himself up, trembling with the effort of wounded pride, not pain. Got to his knees. The murmurs around him prickled like thorns. They were waiting. Watching. Wanting to see what he'd do. His hand hovered near his belt. The weapon was gone. The baton discarded. And suddenly, his fingers felt useless. Hollow. But his voice was still his. Down on the ground, now. Sharp. Commanding. Final. He needed this to sound like a threat. Like a warning. Like justice. Even if none of it was true. The woman didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Her eyes met his, cold, clear, and impossibly calm. And in that stare, he heard the question, is this really the path you choose? She didn't move. Didn't submit. Didn't rise to challenge him either. She just existed. Beyond his reach. The sirens arrived in a blur of red and blue. Tires screeched against grass. A patrol car rolled into view, casting flashing light over the quiet chaos. 2 doors flew open. 2 more officers stepped out. One young, tense, eyes scanning, adrenaline pumping. The other older, slower, deliberate, face lined with the weight of years and the consequences that came with them. The younger one moved first. Ma'am. Hands where we can see them. But before he could take another step, the older officer held out a hand. Firm. Unshaking. Wait. His voice wasn't loud. But it carried something deeper. The weight of lived authority. Of seeing too much. He scanned the scene. Carlisle, on his knees, sweat-drenched, body twitching with shame. The woman, still. Unarmed. Unbothered. The baton. The gun. both on the ground, discarded like props from a story no one believed anymore. The older officer's eyes narrowed, just slightly. The gears behind them turning slow, but sharp. His hands pressed into the pavement, nails biting into his palms as the fire of his failure consumed him. The tension in his chest was unbearable, too heavy, too sharp, too public. The phones were still on him. The eyes. The judgment. But worse than the crowd was the silence. She didn't need to speak. The world had already heard her loud and clear. Carlyle, drowning in the wreckage of his pride, refused to let it end this way. The anger. The humiliation. The broken authority. It demanded a conclusion. His shaking hand moved, not toward his weapon this time, but toward the last tool he had left, his voice. He gripped the radio. "Officer needs assistance. Immediate backup." The words, strained and desperate, echoed through the park like a final flare fired into the sky. The air shifted. The crowd tensed. And for the first time, the woman's expression changed, not with fear, but with something colder. A quiet look that said, "You've made your choice." And then, the sirens answered. The rising wail threaded through the air, a sharp, distant note that promised escalation. The park, once a canvas of sunlight and summer peace, now bristled with unease. People who had once watched with passive curiosity now stood frozen, sensing this had become something bigger than a moment. It was becoming a reckoning. Carlyle pushed himself to his knees. Every part of him screamed to reclaim the story. His fingers twitched toward where his weapon should have been. His voice rang out, sharp and hoarse. Down on the ground. Now. It didn't matter that she had never threatened him. Never touched him. It didn't matter that he had been the one to strike first. He just needed the crowd to believe he was still in control. But she didn't move. Her eyes, though clear, cold, grounded, met his with no fear. Only the quiet question, "Is this really the path you choose?" Then came the patrol car. Tires screeching. Doors flinging open. 2 officers emerged, one young and alert, the other older, slower, with the look of a man who had seen too many endings. The younger one tensed, shouting a command, "Ma'am, hands where we can see them." But the older officer lifted a hand. "Wait." That one word shifted everything. His eyes moved across the scene, the discarded gun, the scattered baton, Carlyle still kneeling, and the woman, unmoving, unthreatening, and yet commanding more presence than anyone else. Carlyle, desperate, pointed toward her. "She assaulted an officer, she." "No." The older officer's voice was firm. Final. Carlyle's face twisted. "What do you mean, no?" "You saw." "I saw everything I needed to." His gaze lingered on the woman with a flicker of recognition, not of what she'd done, but of who she was. Carlyle's heart thundered. The world beneath him crumbled. He felt his hand inching upward again, seeking some last shred of control. "That's enough." The word stopped him. Not loud. Not angry. Just absolute. "Stand down, Carlyle." Carlyle flinched. The use of his name hit harder than any command. "Give me your badge." Silence swallowed the park. The world narrowed to that one moment. His face flushed. His throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no excuse came. "Badge and gun," the older officer repeated. Carlyle's hands, numb, moved to his chest. The shield, the symbol that had once meant everything, felt like a weight now. He unpinned it. It glinted briefly, then dropped into the older officer's hand with a soft metallic thud. The gun followed. No fight. No protest. Just surrender. "Go home, Dan." Carlyle, stripped of rank, walked away. The crowd slowly dispersed. The phones lowered. The sirens faded. And the woman? She sat still. Unshaken. Finally, she stood. A single, calm motion. No charges, she said softly. He's had enough. The older officer nodded. And she turned. Walked. Without hurry. Without looking back. The wind moved again. The laughter returned. The park exhaled. And beneath the fading sun, something unspoken settled into the earth. Something that didn't need headlines or hashtags. Something that would live quietly in the soil beneath the oak tree. Justice doesn't shout. It remains. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful narratives like this. Hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Thanks for watching.